Hi there and welcome to Planet Zoo. I know building in Planet Zoo can be frustrating when you're just starting out. When I first played Planet Coaster, which uses the same system, the whole concept of building piece by piece was completely alien to me. I found the controls a bit confusing and fiddly, and no matter how many tutorials I watched, I couldn't figure it out. Some of the building mechanics aren't that intuitive if you've never played something like this before. I knew exactly what I wanted to build, but I struggled to figure out how to actually do it. So I want to share my top 10 tips that I wish I'd known when I was starting out. So number 10, building pieces versus the scenery pieces. What I found most confusing about building as a beginner is how items will behave differently depending if they're a building piece or a scenery piece. So I'd be trying to get something to copy and repeat or such, and it wouldn't do it, even though I'd done it before. Let me explain why this is. So there's two types of construction pieces in the game. Building pieces like walls and roofing, and scenery pieces, which is all other types of decoration. All pieces can exist in three states, either on their own, in a building group, or in a scenery group. For each of those states, pieces act slightly differently, and if you ever add a building piece to a scenery group, it will automatically convert into a building group. That's tripped me up a few times. Now, you can tell which pieces are scenery and which are building by this little hashtag in the picture. Pieces with the hashtag are building pieces, ones without are scenery. Building pieces have restrictions to how they move in a line, because as soon as you place one, it triggers a grid, and can only move and rotate within the conforms of the grid. Now, before placing, the piece exists off the grid. It can move freely on its own axis and rotate 360 degrees horizontally by holding down the Z key and rotating with your mouse. It can also be moved with the advanced move tool to any position by pressing the X key. Unfortunately, building pieces can't ever be rotated vertically, whether the grid has been triggered or not. Now, once you place the building piece, it triggers the grid and forms a new building group, which you can see up here. You can name these groups, which makes them easier to track if you're building a lot of stuff. In the group, every building piece placed will now only align with this group's specific grid. That free rotation we had before is locked. Every new build piece placed whilst in the group can be rotated, but it will only ever align with the grid. You also can't use the advanced move tool whilst working in the building group. The X button here is not a thing, unless you add a scenery piece. You move build objects by pressing the M key, and they will only conform to the grid. You can still change the rotation of the whole group by pressing escape out of the group menu to where it's highlighted like this, and then press X, and that lets you rotate and move everything again, which is useful if you want to have a number of building groups all working together. Scenery pieces are way more flexible and they can move and rotate in any direction using the advanced move tool. They're not locked to the grid and they won't trigger a new group. You have to manually make a scenery group if you want them to be grouped with other items. Scenery groups work the same way as building groups, except you have to manually make them and they don't trigger a grid. So they still have the free rotation and movement available to them. You make them with the multi-select tool down here, or use the shortcut by pressing the I key. Either manually select everything you want in the group, or drag the mouse across them. Then make a group by pressing this icon up here, and it will form the group. Just remember, if you add a build piece into this group, it will automatically change that into a building group, and will have all the same restrictions as such. Okay, number 9, duplication. Do you ever watch speed builds on YouTube and wonder how they create stuff so quickly? It's knowing the tricks with duplication, and once you know it, it's actually really simple. When you place a scenery item, the game will automatically add another one to the same piece on your cursor for quick placement and such. But say you place an item using the advanced move tool, it doesn't give you another one once it's placed. You can press Ctrl X or D to duplicate this, but that slows the process down. For example, I've got a flower bed here and I want to fill it with this flower piece here. The speedy way to do this is to make a scenery group. So I'll press I to bring up the multi-select tool, then manually select the two flower pieces and form them into a group. Now when I go into that group, I can select one of them with the advanced move tool and it'll produce another one on top of it, which I can then speedily move into the position I want it to be. When it's in place, pressing the tick box, it'll produce another one straight away for movement. And when I press the tick box for that one, it'll produce another one on top of that one, and so on, which is much quicker than doing it all individually. Another trick for duplication is using a scenery group to repeat a pattern. So this fence post here, I want to make it into a long fence. To do so, I need to duplicate a couple, then I can highlight them all with the multi-selection, then duplicate the lot. I can then repeat that process, which is much quicker than placing all of these on their own. One thing that might be confusing with duplication, you can merge and duplicate any number of scenery groups, but the game won't merge building groups because of the whole grid thing. So if I select this one and this one, see the merge option is gone. I can still move them all together, but the only way to duplicate groups with two different building groups is to save it as a blueprint. Once placed in game, blueprints with two or more building groups will act exactly the same way. You won't be able to duplicate. Just think of it as anything with a grid is static, anything without a grid is flexible. Which brings me to tip number 8, splitting groups. Sometimes you don't want to build in the perfectly square grid pattern that the game wants you to. Making things different shapes adds a little more realism to your buildings. For example, if we take a section of this fence and pretend this is a wall of a building, I can add a roof up here, but the final piece is not going to sit flush with the wall. You get it flush by selecting the piece within the building group, then selecting this button up here, which will split the object from the group, forming a new group. Then, with the advanced move, I can move this back a little into the group we've just split it from, and it can now sit flush with the wall below. Just remember, when you do this, you've now made two building groups, and the pieces will act accordingly, so you can't duplicate these now without forming a blueprint. So number 7, camera settings. Now this is a really quick tip. There's 2 camera settings in the game, and I find that one is a lot easier to navigate for building than the other. When you load the game up, it will have you in the standard camera, which moves as such. To move in the free mode camera, press the T key. This changes it to free mode, and I find this much easier to build in than standard. It's difficult to show this one, but try it out in game and see which one you prefer. So tip number 6, angle snap. Embarrassingly, it took me a ridiculously long time to figure this one out. When you're using scenery pieces to make a structure, or placing something flush with something else, and you want to keep everything aligned, make sure to use angle snap. You can do this manually from the tab at the side here, or you can just press down the spacebar before you start moving it when in the simple or advanced move menu. For example, when placing this basket, the game places it upside down. Angle snapping this makes sure it's perfectly straight. This is also handy when building straight structures. So with this block here, I want this smaller block to sit flush on the side. If I do this manually, even though it looks flush, it's probably slightly misaligned. So as the structure goes up, this will eventually start eating into the bigger block. Using angle snap, it's guaranteed to be 100% straight and will continue to keep the same pattern all the way up. So tip number 5, shorter stairs. Pathing is a whole other problem in Planet Zoo. The path tool is really awkward to work with, even when you know what you're doing with it. When you create stairs, which you can do using the U and J keys, it will step up a whole grid piece. Sometimes you don't want stairs that are that tall. To make shorter stairs, you need to select one of the vendor units. When you get near to the path, it'll automatically start to try and join it to the path by creating its own little path. Before placing, you can move the unit up by holding the shift key down and moving it up with your mouse. This then creates a small set of stairs. Place the unit down, then click out and delete it, and it'll leave a shorter set of stairs, which you continue your path from. Okay, tip number 4, terrain stamp. This is something new that we didn't have in Planet Coaster, and it's a great tool for making interesting landscapes quickly, changing the level of the land in a way that is easy to make a path up to. So, in Planet Coaster, you'd have to use the terrain tool to do this, but it was always a bit of a pain and it looked really unnatural, and a lot of the time, the path would say it was too uneven to go up the incline. In Planet Zoo, an easy way to do this is using the terrain stamp. You can make a terrain tier with the stamp. Then to get the ground going up here in a way that doesn't cause path problems, use the same stamp, but press the X key for the advanced move tool. You can then angle the stamp at a position that it will form a nice incline that meets up with the higher level exactly. Smooth this all out a little with the terrain smoothing tool, and then you can create a path that'll make its way up the incline without lumps, bumps, or pathing problems. Okay, my tip number 3, aligning to surface without joining the group. Sometimes you want to add decorative features to a building, but you don't want to add them to the building because it'll trigger the grid restrictions, and that can get fiddly avoiding the building pieces to be able to use the advanced move settings. What I found is that as soon as you move a piece close to a building, it automatically wants to add it to the building group. To prevent this, if you press Ctrl, it'll bring up the move tool. You don't have to move it, but clicking it in place with the Ctrl held down, it won't add it to the building group, leaving you free to do whatever you want with it without it being part of the group. Okay, down to the last few now. My final 2 tips are about things outside of the game that will help you create awesome builds. So first off, number 2, Steam Workshop. If you've never checked out creations on the workshop, I would highly recommend doing this. There are some amazingly talented builders out there creating some excellent content for the game. Not only does it provide some great additions without having to put in the work yourself, but also if you're wanting to work on your builds, you can download stuff from the workshop into your game and see for yourself how creators have put it together. Dissecting somebody else's workshop item in game, you can see exactly how they created it, particularly when people are using various scenery pieces in ways that you might not think of to make something completely different. One way to learn how to get better is to actually see how somebody else has created something and using what they've built to figure out how to build whatever it is that you want to put together yourself. Which leads me to my number 1 tip for creating awesome builds. Looking outside the game, Pinterest and Google Earth are awesome resources for inspiration. There are tons of design examples all across Pinterest. Whether you're looking to make a certain style of building or you need ideas to create a decent habitat, using real life references or design ideas is a good start to visualize what you want to create. I also use Google Earth to figure out realistic pathing and the architectural structure of intricate buildings that I can recreate in game. For example, this is Toronto Zoo on Google Earth. It gives me a good impression what size some of the exhibits should be. It also gives a bird's eye view of what should go where, how to lay out a zoo that looks realistic, so my enclosures aren't too big or too small. Anyway, I hope these tips have been helpful. Leave a comment if you have any other beginner tips or you would like me to explain anything in more detail. Thanks for watching, bye for now.